The snow came down like punishment that night. Eliza Hartwell stood at the window of her father's inn, watching the storm devour the mountain pass. The glass was cold against her forehead. Outside, the wind screamed through the pines, and the world had gone white and wild. Inside, the fire crackled low, and her father snored in his chair near the hearth, his boots still on, his breath thick with whiskey. She should have gone to bed an hour ago, but sleep didn't come easy anymore. 26 years old, and she still lived in the same room she'd slept in as a child, still swept the same floors, still served the same travelers who passed through without looking at her twice. She wasn't ugly, she knew that much, but she wasn't the kind of woman men wrote songs about either. Pale skin, dark hair pulled back tight, a face that people forgot the moment they turned away. Her mother used to say she had good bones, whatever that meant. Her mother had been dead 11 years now. Eliza pressed her palm against the glass and felt the cold seep through. Somewhere out there, beyond the storm, beyond the mountains, there had to be something more than this, but she'd stopped believing she'd ever find it. Then she heard the crash. It came from the front porch, a heavy, wet thud, like a sack of grain hitting the boards. She turned, her heart jumping. Her father didn't stir. He never did once the drink had him. She grabbed the lantern from the table and crossed the room. She just stood there, the lantern shaking in her hand. Then he groaned. She dropped to her knees beside him, the snow soaking through her skirt. "Sir, sir, can you hear me?" He didn't answer. She rolled him onto his back. He was heavy, all muscle and dead weight, and the lantern light fell across his face. He was maybe 30, maybe older, hard to tell. His face was a mess of scars, one running from his eyebrow to his jaw, another across his nose. His beard was wild and frozen. Her father snorted awake. "What in hell?" "Help me," Eliza said, already pulling blankets from the chest by the stairs. Her father blinked at the man on the floor, then at her. "Who is that?" "I don't know, but he's bleeding and he's freezing, and if we don't do something, he'll be dead by morning." Her father rubbed his face, still half drunk. "Eliza, you can't just help me or don't," she said. "But I'm not letting him die." Her father stared at her like he didn't recognize her. Maybe he didn't. She barely recognized herself. Together, they got the man closer to the fire. Eliza peeled off his frozen coat and checked the wound in his side. A deep gash, still bleeding but not gushing. She pressed a cloth against it and tied it tight with strips of torn bedding. His skin was ice cold. She piled blankets over him and filled a pot with water to heat. Her father stood by the fire, arms crossed. "You know what people will say." "I don't care what people say." "You should." She looked up at him. "When did you start caring what people say?" He didn't have an answer for that. By the time the water was warm, her father had gone back to his chair. Eliza knelt beside the stranger and cleaned the blood from his face and hands. His breathing had steadied, but he still hadn't opened his eyes. She studied him in the firelight. The scars on his face told a story she couldn't read. The calluses on his hands said he'd worked hard all his life. His clothes were rough, patched and repatched, the kind a trapper or a drifter might wear. "Who are you?" she whispered. He didn't answer. She stayed beside him all night, watching the rise and fall of his chest, making sure he kept breathing. Every now and then, he'd twitch or mutter something she couldn't understand. Once, his hand reached out and grabbed her wrist, tight, desperate, and his eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. "It's all right," she said softly. "You're safe." He stared at her like he didn't know what that word meant. Then his eyes closed again, and his grip loosened. By dawn, the storm had passed. Eliza stood at the window again, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. The world outside was blinding white, untouched and perfect. The kind of snow that made you forget there was dirt underneath. Behind her, the man stirred. She turned. He was awake now, propped on one elbow, looking around the room like a cornered animal. His eyes landed on her. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, barely more than a rasp. "My father's in," Eliza said. "You collapsed on our porch last night. You were bleeding." He touched his side, winced. "How long?" "One night." He pushed himself up, too fast, and nearly fell. Eliza moved toward him, but he held up a hand. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You need to rest." I need to leave. You'll die if you leave. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. Why'd you help me? She didn't know how to answer that. Because you needed help. He studied her a moment longer, then nodded slowly. Name's Caleb. Caleb Stroud. Eliza Hartwell. Thank you, Miss Hartwell. Just Eliza. He didn't argue. Over the next few days, Caleb stayed. Not because he wanted to, she could see that, but because he didn't have a choice. The wound in his side was deeper than she'd thought, and every time he tried to stand, he'd go pale and have to sit back down. Her father tolerated it. Barely. He didn't say much to Caleb, just watched him with a kind of wary suspicion, like he expected the man to steal something and disappear in the night. Eliza brought Caleb food, changed his bandages, made sure he didn't do anything stupid. He didn't talk much. When he did, it was short answers, nothing more. Where were you headed? She asked one afternoon, sitting across from him at the small table near the fire. Nowhere in particular. Where'd you come from? Lots of places. She waited, but he didn't offer more. You're not much of a talker. No, ma'am. You don't have to call me ma'am. All right. She almost smiled. Almost. A week passed, then another. The wound started to heal and Caleb started moving around more. He didn't offer to help with chores, but he didn't sit idle either. She'd find him chopping wood without being asked, or fixing the broken hinge on the barn door, or clearing snow from the porch. Her father noticed. He's making himself useful. He is, Eliza said. Still don't trust him. You don't trust anyone. Her father grunted and went back to his ledger. One evening, Eliza found Caleb sitting by the fire, staring at a piece of paper in his hands. It was a notice someone had left behind, an advertisement for land out west, printed in big, bold letters. She sat down beside him. Thinking about going west? He didn't look up. Can't read it. She blinked. What? I said I can't read it. He held the paper out to her. What's it say? She took it, surprised. It's about land. Free land, if you're willing to work it. Out in Wyoming territory. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. You can't read? She asked, careful to keep her voice neutral. Never learned. Why not? He shrugged. Never had anyone to teach me, never had time, never thought it mattered. It matters. He looked at her then, something defensive in his eyes. Does it? I've gotten this far without it. You could get farther with it. He didn't answer. She set the paper down. I could teach you. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Why would you do that? Because you want to learn, don't you? He stared at her, and for a moment she thought he'd say no, but then he looked away, his expression unreadable. Yeah, I do. Then I'll teach you. He didn't say thank you, but he didn't say no either. The lessons started the next day. They were awkward at first. Caleb was used to working with his hands, not sitting still with a book. He got frustrated easily, slamming his fist on the table when the letters wouldn't make sense. But Eliza was patient. She'd spent years being patient. Try again, she'd say, pointing to the word. He'd scowl, but he'd try. Slowly, something shifted. The letters started to connect. The words started to form. And when he read his first full sentence, haltingly, painfully, but read it, he looked up at her with something like wonder in his eyes. I did it. You did. He sat back, shaking his head. I'll be damned. She smiled, a real smile, the kind she hadn't felt in years. But the town noticed. It started with whispers. Eliza would walk to the general store, and conversations would stop. Women would glance at her, then look away. Men would smirk. One afternoon, Mrs. Crowley cornered her outside the post office. People are talking, Eliza. Let them talk. It's not proper. A strange man living in your father's house. He's recovering from an injury. He's been there for weeks. So? Mrs. Crowley's mouth thinned. So people are wondering what kind of woman lets a man like that stay under her roof. Eliza felt something hot rise in her chest. A man like what, Mrs. Crowley? You know what I mean. No, I don't. Say it. Mrs. Crowley hesitated, then leaned in. He's rough, Eliza, uneducated, scarred. He's not one of us. Eliza stepped closer. And what are we exactly? A town full of drunks and gossips who spend more time judging others than fixing their own lives? Mrs. Crowley's face went red. Well, I never... Yes, you have. You've said worse about me, about my father, about anyone who doesn't fit your idea of respectable. Eliza's voice was steady now, cold. Caleb Stroud is a better man than most of the men in this town. And if you don't like him being in my house, you can stay out of it. She walked away before Mrs. Crowley could respond. When she got back to the inn, her hands were shaking. She'd never spoken to anyone like that before. Never stood up for herself, never stood up for anyone. It felt terrifying. It felt good. That night she told Caleb what had happened. He listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he set down the book he'd been struggling through and looked at her. You shouldn't have done that. Why not? Because now they'll come after you too. Let them. He shook his head. You don't understand. People like me, we're used to it. But you're not like me. You're good. You're decent. You don't deserve to be dragged down because of me. Maybe I'm tired of being good, she said. He stared at her. Maybe I'm tired of being invisible, she continued. Of living small because that's what everyone expects. I've spent my whole life being quiet and polite and doing what I'm told. And where has it gotten me? I'm 26 years old, and I've never done one damn thing that mattered. Teaching me to read matters. Does it? To who? To me. The words hung in the air between them. Eliza looked away, her throat tight. I don't want to be small anymore, Caleb. Then don't be. She met his eyes. I don't know how. Yes, you do, he said quietly. You already started. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else, something neither of them had a name for. Winter gave way to early spring. The snow melted, the roads cleared, and travelers started passing through again. Caleb's wound had healed. He could have left any time, but he didn't. He stayed, and the lessons continued. He was reading full pages now, slowly but surely, and Eliza was different, stronger. Like teaching him had unlocked something in her she didn't know existed. But the town didn't let up. One night, her father came to her room. He stood in the doorway, looking older than she'd ever seen him. You need to send him away, he said. No. Eliza, I'm not sending him away. Her father sighed, rubbing his face. People are saying things, bad things, about you, about him, about this house. Let them say it. You don't understand what that means. For a woman, I understand perfectly, Eliza said. I understand that I've spent my whole life caring what people think, and it's gotten me nowhere. I understand that Caleb Stroud is the first person in years who's treated me like I have something worth offering, and I understand that if I send him away to make other people comfortable, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Her father stared at her. You care about him. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer. He shook his head slowly. Be careful, Eliza. Men like him, they don't stay. Maybe this one will. Her father left without another word. But the next morning, Caleb was different, distant. He didn't come to the table for his lesson. When Eliza found him outside, he was packing his things. What are you doing? Leaving. Her stomach dropped. Why? Because your father's right. I've been here too long. People are talking, and it's not fair to you. I don't care. Well, I do. He turned to face her, and his expression was hard. You've done enough for me, Eliza. More than enough. But I'm not going to ruin your life because I was too selfish to leave. You're not ruining my life. Not yet. But I will. She stepped closer. You don't get to decide that for me. Yes, I do. No, you don't. Her voice rose. You don't get to walk into my life, make me feel like I actually matter, and then leave because you're scared. I'm not scared. Yes, you are. You're terrified. Because for the first time in your life, someone sees you as more than just a drifter or a stranger or a man with scars, and you don't know what to do with that. He looked at her, and something in his face cracked. I don't know how to be what you need, he said quietly. I don't need you to be anything. she said. I just need you to stay. The silence stretched between them. Then Caleb dropped his pack, and he stayed. Spring came hard that year, all mud and cold rain that turned the roads into rivers of slop. The inn filled up with travelers stuck between towns, waiting for the pass to clear. Eliza worked from dawn until well past dark, cooking, cleaning, changing bedding, hauling water. Her father had taken to drinking earlier in the day, which meant more of the work fell to her. Caleb helped where he could. He didn't ask permission anymore, just did what needed doing. He'd fix a broken shutter, chop wood until the pile was higher than the shed, carry the heavy pots Eliza struggled with. The guests noticed him. How could they not? But he kept his head down and didn't speak unless spoken to. The lessons continued, late at night when the house had gone quiet. Caleb was reading faster now, his finger no longer tracing every word. He'd moved from simple sentences to full paragraphs. And sometimes Eliza would catch him sitting by the fire with a book in his lap, his brow furrowed in concentration, his lips moving silently as he worked through the words. You're getting good at this, she said one night, setting a cup of tea beside him. He looked up, almost sheepish. Still slow. You're not slow, you're learning. There's a difference. He closed the book, a worn copy of something about frontier survival she'd found in the attic, and rubbed his eyes. Never thought I'd be doing this. Reading any of it. He gestured vaguely around the room, sitting in a warm house, drinking tea, talking to someone who doesn't think I'm garbage. You're not garbage, Caleb. I know, you keep telling me. He smiled a little, starting to believe it. She sat down across from him. What was it like before you came here? He hesitated, his hands wrapped around the cup. Lonely, he said finally. I've been on my own since I was 14. My folks died of fever, and I didn't have anyone else, so I just kept moving, trapping, hunting, working where I could. Never stayed anywhere long. Why not? Because nowhere ever felt like staying. He looked at her. Until now. Her heart did something strange in her chest. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But the silence wasn't empty. The next morning, Eliza went into town for supplies. The general store was busy, full of women picking through fabric and men arguing about seed prices. She kept her head down, gathered what she needed, and brought it to the counter. Mr. Bellamy rang up her items without looking at her. That'll be $4.30. She handed him the money. He counted it twice, then slid her change across the counter like he didn't want to touch her hand. Heard that trapper's still living at your place, he said. Eliza met his eyes. He is. Been there a while now. He has. Mr. Bellamy's mouth tightened. People are wondering when he's planning to move on. People should mind their own business. A woman behind her gasped. Eliza didn't turn around. She gathered her supplies and walked out, her face hot, her hands shaking. She made it halfway down the street before someone called her name. Eliza, wait! She turned. It was Thomas Mercer, the banker's son. He was a few years older than her, tall and clean-shaven, the kind of man mothers pointed out to their daughters. He'd asked her to dance once, at a town social 3 years ago. She'd said no. He'd never asked again. Thomas. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I wanted to talk to you if you have a moment. She didn't, but she nodded. He glanced around, then stepped closer. I've been hearing things about you and that man staying at your father's inn. His name is Caleb. Right, Caleb. Thomas shifted his weight. Look, I'm not here to judge, but people are talking, and it's not good. For you, I mean. I don't care what people say. You should. A woman's reputation is none of your concern. Thomas blinked. I'm just trying to help. Are you? Eliza studied him. Or are you trying to make yourself feel important by telling me what I already know? His jaw tightened. That's not fair. Isn't it? She started to walk away, then stopped. You know what, Thomas? You had your chance 3 years ago, and you never even tried. So don't come to me now pretending you care about my reputation. You care about what people think of you for knowing me. She left him standing there, his face red. When she got back to the inn, Caleb was outside splitting wood. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, his axe frozen mid-swing. "You all right?" "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." She set the supplies down harder than she meant to. "I'm tired of this town." Caleb sank the axe into the stump and wiped his hands on his pants. "What happened?" "Nothing. Everything. I don't know." "Uppas." She pressed her hands to her face. "Everyone has an opinion about you, about me, about what we're doing, and they won't shut up about it." "I told you this would happen. I know you did." She dropped her hands. "But I didn't think it would feel like this." "Like what?" "Like I'm suffocating." He stepped closer, his expression careful. "You want me to leave?" "No." The word came out too fast, too desperate. She took a breath. "No, I don't want you to leave. I don't know what to do. You could stop caring what they think. I'm trying. Try harder." She almost laughed. "That easy, huh?" "Didn't say it was easy, said it was worth it." She looked at him, standing there in his worn shirt and patched pants, his hands still scarred from years of hard work, his face marked by a life she'd never know. And she thought about how much he'd changed in the months he'd been here, how he stood a little straighter now, how he smiled more, how he read every night like it was the most important thing in the world. "You're different than when you got here," she said. "So are you." "Am I?" "Yeah." He picked up a piece of wood, turned it over in his hands. "You don't apologize as much. You speak your mind, you look people in the eye. I learned that from you." "No," he said. "You always had it. You just needed a reason to use it." She didn't know what to say to that, so she picked up the supplies and went inside. That night her father cornered her in the kitchen. "I need to talk to you." Eliza kept scrubbing the pot in her hands. "So, talk." "I had a visit today, from Thomas Mercer's father." Her hands stilled. What did he want? He wanted to know if the rumors were true, if you and that trapper were... He trailed off, his face uncomfortable. "Were what?" "You know what?" Eliza set the pot down and dried her hands. "We're not doing anything wrong. It doesn't matter if you are or not. It matters what people think." "Why?" She turned to face him. "Why does it matter so much what they think?" "Because we live here, Eliza, because this is a small town, and reputation is everything." "Reputation?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about reputation? You spend half your day drunk and the other half sleeping it off. But no one says a word about that, do they? Because you're a man. Because men get to do whatever they want, and women have to be perfect." Her father's face went red. "That's not fair." "Isn't it? I've given you a roof over your head, food on your plate, and I've worked for every bit of it. I've run this inn for years while you drank yourself stupid, so don't stand there and tell me I owe you something." He stared at her like she'd slapped him. "I'm not sending Caleb away," she said, "and if people don't like it, they can stay out of my house." She walked out before he could respond. Caleb was in his room, the small storage space off the kitchen that he'd turned into something livable. The door was open, and he was sitting on the edge of the narrow bed, a book in his lap. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "You heard all that?" "Hard not to." She leaned against the doorframe. "I keep making things worse." "You keep telling the truth. That's different." "Is it?" He set the book aside. "My whole life, people have told me what I am. Worthless, stupid, not worth the trouble. And I believed them. Because when enough people say the same thing, you start to think it must be true." He looked at her. "But you didn't see me that way. You saw something else, and it made me think maybe they were wrong. Maybe I was worth something after all. You are worth something. So are you." He stood, crossing the small space between them. "Don't let them make you small again, Eliza. You're better than that." She looked up at him, and something shifted in the air. He was close enough that she could see the faint scars on his jaw, the lines around his eyes, the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. "Caleb, I should go," he said suddenly, stepping back. "I should leave before this gets worse. I don't want you to go." "I know, but maybe I should anyway." "Why?" "Because you deserve better than this. Better than a broken-down trapper who can barely read and doesn't have 2 cents to his name. I don't care about that. You should. Well, I don't. She stepped closer. I don't care that you can't read perfectly, or that you don't have money, or that people think you're beneath me. I care that you're kind, that you're honest, that you make me feel like I'm not invisible. He looked at her, his expression pained. Eliza, I'm not asking you for anything, she said. I'm just asking you to stay. The silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. Then Caleb reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. All right, he said quietly. I'll stay. But staying wasn't simple. Over the next few weeks, the gossip got worse. Women crossed the street to avoid her. Men made comments loud enough for her to hear. One afternoon, she found a note slipped under the inn's door. It was unsigned, but the message was clear. Shameful. You disgrace your mother's memory. She crumpled it and threw it in the fire. Caleb found her standing there staring at the flames. Another one? Yeah. He didn't ask what it said. He didn't need to. I'm making your life hell, he said. No, they are. Same thing. It's not. She turned to face him. They're the ones with the problem, not us. Maybe, but you're the one paying for it. She didn't argue, because he was right. That Sunday, Eliza skipped church for the first time in her life. She couldn't sit in that building, surrounded by people who smiled to her face and whispered behind her back. She couldn't pretend anymore. Caleb didn't ask why she stayed home. He just sat with her at the kitchen table, working his way through a new book. Something about history that he was only half understanding but refused to give up on. You ever think about leaving? She asked. He looked up. This town? Everything. The inn, the people, all of it. He studied her. Where would you go? I don't know. Somewhere no one knows me. Somewhere I could start over. You really mean that? She thought about it. Really thought about it. Yeah, I think I do. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I got a letter last week. A letter? From a man I used to trap with. He's out in Wyoming now, working a ranch. Says they need hands. Says the pay's decent and there's land available if you're willing to work it. Eliza's heart started to beat faster. What did you tell him? I didn't. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go. He looked at her. But if you're serious about leaving, we could go together. She stared at him. Together? If you want. He shifted, suddenly uncomfortable. I mean, I know it's not proper, but we could figure something out. You could teach, maybe. I could work the ranch. We could... Yes. He stopped. Yes? Yes. Let's go. He blinked. Just like that? Just like that. A slow smile spread across his face. All right then. But leaving wasn't as simple as deciding to go. First, there was her father. When she told him, he didn't yell. He just sat in his chair, staring into his glass and said, You're really going to do this? I am. With him. Yes. He took a long drink. You'll regret it. Maybe. But it'll be my regret, not yours. He looked up at her then, and for a moment she saw something like sadness in his eyes. I wasn't a good father. No, you weren't. I should have been better. After your mother died, I should have... He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter now. It does matter. Not enough to change anything. He set his glass down. You're going to leave, and I'm going to stay here and drink myself to death. That's just how it is. Eliza felt her throat tighten. You could come with us. He laughed, bitter and broken. No, I couldn't. She wanted to argue, but she knew it wouldn't change anything. Take care of yourself, Eliza, he said. Better than I did. She left him there, alone with his bottle. The second problem was money, or the lack of it. We need at least $50, Caleb said, doing the math in his head. For supplies, for the trip, for getting started once we're there? I have 12. I have 6. They sat in silence, staring at the meager pile of coins on the table. I could sell some things, Eliza said. My mother's jewelry. It's not much, but... No. Caleb, no, you're not selling your mother's things. Then what do we do? He thought for a moment. I could take extra work. There's a man in town who needs help clearing his land. He's offering $2 a day. That'll take weeks. Then it takes weeks. So Caleb worked. He worked from dawn until dark, clearing trees and hauling rocks and digging ditches until his hands bled. He came back to the inn every night exhausted, barely able to eat before he collapsed into bed. Eliza hated watching it, hated that he was destroying himself for her. You don't have to do this, she said one night, wrapping his blistered hands in strips of cloth. Yes, I do. Why? He looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. Because you're worth it. She didn't know what to say to that. 4 weeks later, they had $43. It's not enough, Eliza said. It'll have to be. They set the date, 2 weeks from Sunday. Enough time to finish preparations, to say whatever goodbyes needed saying, to make sure they weren't leaving anything important behind. Eliza told no one, not because she was ashamed, but because she knew what would happen if word got out. The town would make it impossible. They'd find ways to stop her, to delay them, to make sure she stayed right where she was. But someone found out anyway. She was at the general store buying the last of the supplies they'd need when Mrs. Crowley appeared beside her. I heard you're leaving. Eliza didn't look at her. You heard right. With that man. His name is Caleb. I know his name. Mrs. Crowley's voice was tight. What I don't know is what you're thinking. Running off with a stranger, no marriage, no plan. I have a plan. Do you? Or are you just running away because you can't handle the truth? Eliza set down the bag of flowers she'd been holding and turned to face the older woman. What truth is that, Mrs. Crowley? That you're making a mistake. That you're throwing your life away for a man who'll leave you the first chance he gets. He's not going to leave me. How do you know? Because I know him. Mrs. Crowley laughed, sharp and cruel. You've known him for a few months, Eliza. You don't know anything. I know more about him than I know about anyone in this town, including you. This is a mistake. Maybe. But it's mine to make. She paid for her supplies and walked out, her heart pounding. When she got back to the inn, Caleb was waiting. He took one look at her face and said, What happened? Nothing. Eliza, I'm fine. She set the supplies down and turned to him. We're leaving in 2 weeks, no matter what. Promise me. I promise. Say it again. I promise. 2 weeks, no matter what. She nodded, trying to steady her breathing. That night, they made a plan. They'd leave early in the morning before the town woke up. They'd take the stage as far as it would go, then find work along the way to cover the rest of the journey. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to safe. But it was theirs. You scared? Caleb asked. Terrified. Me too. She looked at him. You don't have to be. Yeah, I do. I'm about to take you away from the only home you've ever known. If something goes wrong, then we'll figure it out, together. He reached across the table and took her hand. Together. The final week passed in a blur. Eliza packed what little she owned, clothes, a few books, her mother's silver comb. Caleb gathered supplies, double-checked their route, made sure everything was ready. On the last night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, looking out at the town she'd lived in her entire life. The buildings were dark, the streets empty. It didn't feel like home anymore. Maybe it never had. Behind her, Caleb stirred. You awake? Yeah. He crossed the room and stood beside her. Second thoughts? No. You? No. They stood there in silence, watching the darkness. What do you think it'll be like? As she asked. Wyoming. Hard, cold, beautiful, probably. You think we'll make it? I think we'll try. She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders. I'm glad you stayed, she said. Me too. The next morning, they left. Her father was still asleep when they slipped out the door. Eliza left a note on the table, short, simple, no apologies. She didn't owe him anything more than that. The stage was waiting at the edge of town. Caleb loaded their things while Eliza bought the tickets. The driver, an old man with a face like leather, barely looked at them. "Where to?" "West," Caleb said. "That's not specific." "West is specific enough." The driver shrugged and pocketed the money. They climbed into the stage. There were two other passengers, a woman with a crying baby and a man in a dusty suit who looked like he hadn't slept in days. No one spoke. As the stage pulled away, Eliza looked back at the town one last time. She half expected to see someone running after them, shouting for them to stop. But the streets were empty. She turned forward and didn't look back again. Caleb reached over and took her hand. His palm was rough and warm, steady in a way that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. "You ready?" he asked. She squeezed his hand. "Yeah, I'm ready." The stage rolled west, carrying them towards something they couldn't name and didn't understand. But for the first time in her life, Eliza wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was running toward it. The road west was nothing like Eliza had imagined. She'd pictured something almost romantic, wide open country, endless sky, the two of them moving forward into a new life. What she got instead was dust, heat, and a bone-rattling stage that felt like it was trying to shake her teeth loose. The woman with the baby got off after the first day. The man in the suit lasted 2 more, then disappeared at a crossroads without a word. After that, it was just Eliza and Caleb, rattling along through country that grew emptier with every mile. They didn't talk much during the days. The noise of the stage made conversation hard, and there was something about the vastness outside the windows that made words feel small and pointless. But at night, when they stopped at whatever rough station or settlement the driver could find, they'd sit together by whatever fire was available, and Caleb would pull out one of the books Eliza had packed. "Read to me," she'd say. And he would. Slowly, sometimes stumbling over words he hadn't seen before, but getting better each time. She'd correct him gently when he got stuck, and he'd nod and try again. It was their ritual now, the thing that made the hard days feel bearable. On the 5th night, they stopped at a place that barely qualified as a town, just a trading post, a barn, and a scattering of tents where travelers camped. The woman who ran the post was older than dirt, with a face like a dried apple and eyes that didn't miss anything. "You two married?" she asked when they came in to buy supplies. Eliza hesitated. Caleb didn't. "Not yet." The woman's eyebrows went up. "Not yet. We're working on it." She looked between them, then shrugged. "None of my business. But if you're planning to travel together without being married, you should know people will talk." "People always talk," Eliza said. The woman smiled, showing the gaps where teeth used to be. "That they do." She wrapped their supplies in brown paper. "There's a man 2 towns over, justice of the peace. He'll marry you for $5 if you're serious about it." Caleb looked at Eliza. "You want to?" Her heart was suddenly beating too fast. "Do you?" "I asked you first." "That's not an answer." He smiled a little. "Yeah, I want to." "Then yes." The woman cackled. "Well, that was easy." She wrote something on a scrap of paper and handed it to Caleb. "Name's Reverend Willis. Tell him Maggie sent you. He'll take care of you." They left the trading post with their supplies and a wedding planned for 2 days from now. That night, sitting by the fire outside the barn where they'd paid a nickel each to sleep in the hayloft, Eliza couldn't stop thinking about it. "Are we crazy?" she asked. Caleb was whittling a piece of wood he'd found, his knife moving in slow, careful strokes. "Probably." "That's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be." He looked up at her. "You getting cold feet?" "No. Maybe. I don't know." She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "It's just happening so fast. You want to wait?" "No." "Then what's the problem?" "I don't know if I know how to be married." He laughed, soft and rough. "You think I do?" "Fair point." He set the wood aside and moved closer to her. "Look, I don't know what I'm doing either. Never thought I'd get married. Never thought anyone would want me. But here we are." He took her hand. "We'll figure it out. Same way we figured out everything else." She looked down at their joined hands, his scarred and calloused, hers small and pale against his. "What if we mess it up?" Then we mess it up, but at least we'll mess it up together. She laughed, surprising herself. That's a terrible proposal. Good thing I'm not proposing. Already did that back at the trading post. That wasn't a proposal. That was a transaction. You want me to do it proper? No. You sure? Yes. He grinned. All right then. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn down. Around them, other travelers were settling in for the night. A family with 3 kids who wouldn't stop crying, a pair of miners heading to the Montana territories, a lone woman who kept to herself and didn't meet anyone's eyes. You ever wonder what your life would have been like if I hadn't shown up? Caleb asked. Eliza thought about it. Probably the same, just smaller. You weren't small. I felt small. Not anymore, though. No, she said. Not anymore. 2 days later, they stood in front of Reverend Willis in a room that smelled like tobacco and old paper. The Reverend was younger than Eliza expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a tired smile. You have the $5? He asked. Caleb handed it over. All right then. Willis opened a worn book and flipped to a marked page. You got witnesses? They didn't. Willis stuck his head out the door and called to someone. A moment later, 2 men appeared, ranch hands, by the look of them, dusty and sunburned. They need witnesses, Willis said. The men shrugged and came inside. The ceremony lasted maybe 3 minutes. Willis read from his book, asked them if they took each other, waited for them to say yes. Then he had them sign a paper, the witnesses signed below them, and that was it. You're married, Willis said. Congratulations. It didn't feel real. Eliza kept waiting for something more, some moment of clarity or transformation. But she just felt like herself, standing in a hot room next to a man she barely knew and had just promised her life to. Caleb shook Willis's hand. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Marriage is the easy part. Staying married, that's the work. He looked at Eliza. You ready for that? I don't know. Good. Means you're honest. He smiled. You'll do fine. They walked out into the afternoon sun, officially husband and wife, and Eliza realized she didn't feel any different at all. Well, Caleb said, that happened. It did. You regret it? Ask me in a year. He laughed. Fair enough. They still had another week of travel ahead of them. The stage took them as far as Cheyenne, where they spent the last of their money on a wagon ride north to the ranch where Caleb's friend worked. The driver was a taciturn man who didn't speak unless spoken to, which suited Eliza fine. She was too tired to make conversation anyway. The land here was different, flatter, wilder, the mountains just shadows on the western horizon. The sky felt bigger somehow, like it was trying to swallow everything underneath it. Eliza couldn't decide if she loved it or hated it. You all right? Caleb asked. Just tired. It's not much farther. You keep saying that. Because it's true. She wanted to believe him, but she'd been on the road so long now that it felt like they'd never stop moving, like this was just her life now, lurching from one place to the next, never quite arriving anywhere. They reached the ranch at sunset. It wasn't much to look at. A main house that had seen better days, a barn that leaned slightly to one side, a scattering of smaller buildings that might have been bunkhouses or storage sheds. A few horses grazed in a corral, and chickens scattered as the wagon pulled up. A man came out of the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. He was tall, lean, with a beard that had gone mostly gray. When he saw Caleb, his face split into a grin. Well, I'll be damned. Stroud. Caleb jumped down from the wagon and clasped the man's hand. Hank. Didn't think you'd actually come. Said I would. Hank's eyes shifted to Eliza, still sitting in the wagon. And who's this? This is Eliza, my wife. Hank's eyebrows went up. Wife, you got married. Last week. Well. Hank stepped forward and offered Eliza his hand. Welcome, ma'am. I'm Hank Dawson. I run this place for better or worse. Eliza shook his hand. Thank you for having us. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen where you'll be sleeping. He wasn't wrong. The bunkhouse Hank showed them to was barely more than 4 walls and a roof. 2 narrow beds, a table, a stove that looked like it hadn't worked in years. The windows didn't have glass, just shutters that didn't quite close. The floor was dirt. "I know it's not much," Hank said, "but it's dry, and it's yours." Eliza looked around, trying not to cry. This was it. This was what they'd left everything for. "It's fine," Caleb said. "We'll make it work." Hank clapped him on the shoulder. "That's the spirit. Get settled and come up to the house for dinner. My wife's cooking, and she always makes too much." After he left, Eliza sat down on one of the beds. It creaked ominously under her weight. Caleb set their bags down and looked around. "It's not so bad." "Caleb." "What?" "It's terrible." He sat down beside her. "Yeah, it is." She started laughing. She couldn't help it. It was either laugh or cry, and she was too tired to cry. Caleb joined in, and for a moment they just sat there on the broken bed in the dirt floor shack, laughing like idiots. "We really did it," she said when she could breathe again. "We really left everything and came here." "We did. We're insane." "Probably." She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her. "What if it doesn't work?" "Then we'll figure something else out." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." That night they had dinner with Hank and his wife, Martha, a round woman with flour on her apron and a laugh that filled the room. There were 6 other ranch hands at the table, all men, all curious about the newcomers. They asked Caleb where he'd come from, what he knew about ranching, if he could ride. He answered honestly. He could ride. He knew a little about cattle. He was willing to learn the rest. "And you, ma'am?" Martha asked Eliza. "What do you do?" I ran an inn with my father, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing." "Can you teach?" Eliza blinked. "Teach?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic. We've got kids around here who could use it. The nearest school is 30 miles away, and most families can't spare the time to send them." I suppose I could." Martha smiled. "Good. We'll talk more about it tomorrow." After dinner, Eliza and Caleb walked back to the bunkhouse under a sky so full of stars it didn't look real. Eliza had never seen anything like it. "It's beautiful," she said. "It is. I'm still terrified." "Me too." She looked at him. "You're not supposed to say that. You're supposed to tell me everything will be fine." "Would you believe me if I did?" "No." "Then there's no point lying." She took his hand. "We're really doing this." "Yeah, we are." The first few weeks were harder than anything Eliza had ever done. She woke before dawn to help Martha cook for the ranch hands, spent the day trying to make the bunkhouse livable, and fell into bed at night too exhausted to think. Caleb worked from sunup to sundown, learning the rhythms of ranch life, mending fences, moving cattle, breaking horses. He came back every night with new bruises, new cuts, new stories about things that had gone wrong. "Horse threw me today," he said one night, wincing as he sat down. "Are you hurt?" "Just my pride." "Caleb, I'm fine. Hank said I did good for a first-timer." "That's not reassuring." He grinned. "Wasn't meant to be." Despite everything, they started to settle in. Eliza fixed up the bunkhouse as best she could, swept the dirt floor until it was almost smooth, hung curtains over the windows, got the stove working well enough to heat water. It still wasn't much, but it was theirs. And then Martha came to her about the teaching. "There are 5 children on this ranch and 3 more on the neighboring spread," she said. "None of them can read. None of them can write their own names. They need someone to teach them, and you're the only one here who can do it." Eliza's stomach twisted. "I've never taught children before." "You taught Caleb, didn't you?" "That's different." "Not as different as you think." Martha handed her a stack of old primers. "Start with these. Teach them the alphabet, basic words, numbers. They don't need much, just enough to get by." So Eliza became a teacher. She started with 1 hour a day, gathering the children in the barn after morning chores. They ranged in age from 6 to 13, 5 boys and 3 girls, all of them wary and uncertain. She wasn't sure who was more nervous, them or her. "My name is Mrs. Stroud," she said that first day. and I'm going to teach you how to read. One of the boys, a scrawny kid named Tom, raised his hand. Why? Because it's important. My pa says it's a waste of time. Your pa's wrong. The kid stared at her. She stared back. Reading means you can understand contracts so no one can cheat you. It means you can write letters to people you love. It means you can learn things on your own without having to rely on someone else to tell you what's true. She looked at each of them. Your father might not see the value in that, but I do, and I think you will too. Tom didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. They started with the alphabet. It was slow, frustrating work. Half the kids couldn't sit still, and the other half didn't want to be there. But Eliza kept at it, day after day, until slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, they started to learn. One afternoon, about a month in, Tom read an entire sentence without help. It was just 5 words. The dog ran very fast. But when he finished, he looked up at her with something like pride in his eyes. I did it. You did. Can I do another one? Of course. She watched him sound out the next sentence, his finger tracing each word, and she felt something shift inside her. This mattered. This was worth doing. That night, she told Caleb about it. Tom read today. A whole sentence. That's good. It's more than good. It's... She stopped, searching for the word. It's important. Caleb set down the book he'd been reading. You like teaching. I think I do. Then keep doing it. It's hard. So? She smiled. You're right. So what? But not everything was getting easier. Money was tight. Caleb's wages were barely enough to cover their share of the food costs, let alone save anything. The bunkhouse was freezing at night, and they only had 2 thin blankets between them, and the other ranch hands were starting to talk. Eliza heard it one day when she was walking past the bunkhouse where the single men stayed. The door was open, and voices drifted out. You see Stroud's wife today, teaching those kids like she's something special. She thinks she's better than us? Probably. Town girl, not used to real work. And Stroud, you see him trying to break that mare? Damn near got himself killed. He's going to get someone else killed if he keeps that up. Eliza kept walking, her face hot. When she got back to their bunkhouse, she told Caleb what she'd heard. He didn't look surprised. They've been saying worse to my face. Why didn't you tell me? Because there's nothing to tell. People talk. Always have. Always will. It bothers me. It bothers me too. But what are we going to do about it? Leave? No? Then we ignore it and keep working. She hated that he was right. Winter came early that year, hard and mean. The temperature dropped so fast that one morning Eliza woke up to find ice on the inside of the windows. The stove barely kept the room above freezing, and she wore every piece of clothing she owned just to stay warm. Teaching became impossible. The barn was too cold, and none of the parents would send their kids out in weather that brutal. So Eliza spent her days helping Martha with whatever needed doing, cooking, mending, trying to keep the house warm enough that the pipes didn't freeze. Caleb worked outside every day, no matter the weather. He came back with his fingers so numb he couldn't hold a fork, his face red and raw from the wind. One night he came back with a black eye. What happened? Got into it with one of the hands. Over what? Doesn't matter, Smith. Caleb, he said something about you. I told him to shut up. He didn't, so I hit him. Eliza's stomach sank. You can't do that. Why not? Because we need this job. Because if Hank fires you, we have nowhere to go. He's not going to fire me. How do you know? Because Hank already talked to me. Told me to keep my temper under control, but he didn't seem too upset about it. Caleb touched his eye and winced. The other guy looks worse. That's not funny. Wasn't trying to be. She wanted to be angry at him, but part of her, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, was glad he'd stood up for her. Christmas came and went without ceremony. They didn't have money for gifts, and there was too much work to take a day off. Eliza marked the occasion by making a better dinner than usual. Roast chicken instead of stew, biscuits with butter, an apple pie Martha had helped her with. This is good, Caleb said, his mouth full. Don't talk with your mouth full. He swallowed. This is good, he said again. She smiled despite herself. Thank you. You're a good cook. I'm an adequate cook. Better than adequate. You're just saying that because you're hungry. Maybe, but it's still true. After dinner, they sat by the stove, trying to absorb what little heat it gave off. Caleb pulled out a book. He was reading better now, hardly stumbling at all, and read aloud while Eliza mended a shirt that had torn at the shoulder. You ever think about what we left behind, see? He asked, setting the book down. Sometimes. You miss it. Parts of it. Not most of it. What parts? She thought about it. I miss knowing where everything was. I miss feeling like I understood how the world worked. Even if I hated it, at least I knew what to expect. And now? Now I don't know anything, but I think that's all right. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I think so too. By the time spring arrived, they'd been at the ranch almost 6 months. Eliza had saved enough money from doing laundry and mending for the other hands that she could afford to buy real glass for the windows. Caleb had earned Hank's respect, and the other hands had mostly stopped giving him trouble, and the children were reading. Not all of them, and not perfectly. But when Eliza opened the barn for lessons again, all 8 of them showed up, and they remembered what she'd taught them. They were hungry for more. Can we learn about history? One of the girls asked. Can we learn about numbers? Tom wanted to know. Can we learn about maps? Eliza looked at their eager faces and felt something like hope. Yes, she said. We can learn about all of it. That night, she told Caleb they needed to stay. I thought we were planning to get our own land, he said. We were. We are. But not yet. Why not? Because those kids need me, and I need them. He studied her face. You sure? Yes. All right then, we'll stay. It was the right decision. Eliza knew it the moment she made it, but she also knew it was just the beginning. The decision to stay changed things in ways Eliza hadn't anticipated. Within a month, word had spread to the neighboring ranches that someone was teaching children to read. Parents started showing up, asking if their kids could join. Some offered to pay, a few cents here, a chicken there, whatever they could spare. Eliza took what they offered, but never turned anyone away who couldn't pay. By summer, she had 15 students crowded into the barn 3 times a week. You're going to need a bigger space, Martha said one afternoon, watching the children sprawl across every available surface. I know, but where? Martha wiped her hands on her apron. Talk to Hank, he might have ideas. Hank did have ideas. That evening, he pulled Caleb aside after dinner. Your wife's doing good work with those kids, he said. She is. People are noticing. I've had 3 families ask me if she'd be willing to teach their children too. Problem is, the barn's not big enough, and it's needed for other things come fall. Caleb waited. There's an old cabin about 2 miles east of here, Hank continued. Used to be a line shack, but we don't use it anymore. It's small, but it's sturdy. You could fix it up, turn it into a schoolhouse. What's it going to cost? Your labor. You fix it up on your own time, and you and Eliza can use it for teaching. In exchange, I'll reduce your rent on the bunkhouse by half. And Caleb didn't need to think about it. Deal. When he told Eliza, her eyes went wide. A real schoolhouse? Well, a cabin that could be a schoolhouse. It needs work. How much work? A lot, probably, but we can do it. She threw her arms around him, something she still didn't do often enough for his liking. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen it. The cabin was worse than Caleb had described. The roof had a hole the size of a dinner plate. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and something, probably raccoons, had made a nest in the corner. But it had 4 walls, 2 windows, and a stone fireplace that looked like it might still work. Eliza stood in the doorway, hands on her hips, surveying the damage. It's a disaster, she said. Yeah. It's going to take months to fix. Probably. We should get started. They worked on the cabin every spare moment they had. Caleb patched the roof with wood he scrounged from the ranch and tar he bought with money they didn't have. Eliza scrubbed the floors until her hands cracked and bled. They hauled out the raccoon nest, replaced the broken window glass, fixed the door so it actually closed. The other ranch hands thought they were crazy. You're killing yourself for a bunch of kids who aren't even yours, one of them said to Caleb. Maybe. Why? Caleb hammered another nail into the roof. Because it matters to my wife, and what matters to her matters to me. The man shook his head and walked away. But not everyone thought they were crazy. Some of the parents whose children Eliza taught started showing up to help. A farmer named Garrett brought lumber he'd been saving for a new shed. A woman named Susan spent 2 days helping Eliza clean and paint the interior. Tom's father, the same man who'd said reading was a waste of time, showed up one Saturday with a wagon load of stones to reinforce the fireplace. "Thought you didn't believe in this," Eliza said. He shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "My boy reads now, reads better than I ever could. Figure that's worth something." By late August, the cabin was ready. It wasn't fancy. The floor was still uneven in places, and the windows didn't quite fit their frames. But it was clean, it was dry, and it was theirs. Eliza stood in the middle of the room the day before the first official class, turning slowly to take it all in. "You did it," Caleb said from the doorway. "We did it." "No, you did it. I just hammered some nails." She walked over to him and took his hand. "We did it together." The school opened on a Tuesday. 23 children showed up, ranging from 5 to 15 years old. Eliza had spent the previous week figuring out how to organize them, the younger ones in the morning, the older ones in the afternoon. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. That first day was chaos. The young children wouldn't sit still, the older ones were sullen and resistant, and Eliza's voice was hoarse by noon from trying to keep order, but she pushed through, teaching the alphabet to the little ones and basic arithmetic to the older students. By the end of the day, she was exhausted. "How'd it go?" Caleb asked that night. "Terrible." "That bad?" "Worse. Half of them didn't want to be there, and the other half wouldn't stop talking. I have no idea what I'm doing." "You'll figure it out." "What if I don't?" He pulled her close. "Then you'll figure that out too." But she did figure it out. Slowly, day by day, she learned how to manage the chaos. She learned which children needed gentle encouragement and which needed firm boundaries. She learned how to make lessons interesting, how to keep the older students engaged while still helping the younger ones. And the children learned. By October, even the most resistant students were making progress. Tom, who'd been reading for almost a year now, was helping teach the younger kids. A girl named Sarah, who'd barely spoken the first month, was now reading aloud with confidence. A boy named James, who everyone had written off as slow, turned out to have a gift for numbers. "You're good at this," Martha told Eliza one afternoon. "I'm adequate at this." "You're better than adequate. Those kids love you." Eliza looked out at the schoolhouse, where a few students were still lingering after class, practicing their letters on slates. "I love them too." But success brought new problems. More families wanted their children to attend, but the cabin was already crowded. Some parents complained that Eliza spent too much time on reading and not enough on practical skills. Others thought she was pushing the children too hard. And a few, mostly men, thought the whole thing was a waste of time and resources. One of those men was a rancher named Coleman, who lived on the neighboring spread. He showed up at the schoolhouse one afternoon, his face red with anger. "My boy says you've been teaching them about the government," he said. "I've been teaching them about how laws are made, yes." "Why?" "Because it's important for them to understand how the country works. What they need to understand is how to work a ranch, not how to waste time with books and ideas that don't mean nothing out here." Eliza kept her voice calm. "Reading and writing are practical skills, Mr. Coleman. They'll need them whether they work a ranch or do something else." "Do something else?" Coleman's voice rose. "You putting ideas in their heads? Making them think they're too good for the life they got?" "I'm teaching them that they have choices." "They don't have choices. They got responsibilities, and you're making that harder." He stormed out before Eliza could respond. That night she told Caleb what had happened. "You think he's going to pull his son out?" she asked. "Probably." "What if others do the same?" "Then they do. You can't control what people think, Eliza. You can only do what you think is right. And if what I think is right isn't what they want, then they'll have to live with that, same as you." Coleman did pull his son out, but to Eliza's surprise, no one else followed. In fact, a few more families asked if their children could start attending. The schoolhouse was bursting at the seams. "You need help," Martha said. "You can't teach all these children by yourself." I don't have money to hire anyone. What about Caleb? Eliza blinked. Caleb? He can read now, can he? And write? He could teach the younger ones while you work with the older students. He's working on the ranch. Talk to Hank. Maybe you can work something out. When Eliza brought it up to Caleb that night, he looked uncomfortable. I don't know if I'm ready for that. You're more than ready. I've only been reading for a little over a year. What if I mess up? Then you'll figure it out, same as I did. He didn't look convinced. Caleb, she said gently, you've spent your whole life thinking you weren't good enough, but you are. And those kids need someone who understands what it's like to struggle with learning, someone who won't give up on them. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, All right, I'll talk to Hank. Hank agreed to let Caleb split his time, mornings on the ranch, afternoons at the school. The pay was less, but they'd make it work. Caleb's first day teaching was almost as chaotic as Eliza's had been. The younger children were wild, running around and refusing to sit still, but Caleb didn't get frustrated. He just sat down on the floor with them and started drawing letters in the dirt with a stick. See this? He said, drawing an A. This is the first letter. It's called A. Who can make one like it? The children crowded around, eager to try. By the end of the week, Caleb had figured out his own rhythm. He was patient in ways Eliza wasn't, willing to repeat the same lesson 10 times if that's what it took. And the children responded to him, especially the ones who struggled, the ones who'd been told they were too slow or too dumb to learn. You're a natural, Eliza told him one afternoon, watching him work with a boy who'd been struggling with the alphabet for weeks. I just remember what it felt like, Caleb said, to think you're stupid because you can't do something everyone else can. I don't want them to feel that way. They're lucky to have you. They're lucky to have both of us. As winter approached again, the schoolhouse became more than just a place to learn. It became a gathering place for the community. Parents would drop off their children and stay to talk, sharing news and gossip. On cold days, Eliza would make soup and everyone would eat together, crowded around the fireplace. The school was becoming something bigger than she'd imagined. It wasn't just about reading and writing anymore. It was about building something that mattered, something that would last. But not everyone was happy about it. One evening in late November, Eliza came back to the bunkhouse to find Caleb pacing, his face tight with anger. What happened? Got into it with Coleman again. What did he say? Said we're ruining the kids, making them soft, filling their heads with nonsense instead of teaching them how to survive. What did you say? I told him we're teaching them how to think, how to make their own decisions, how to be more than just laborers who do what they're told. Caleb stopped pacing. Then I told him if he had a problem with that, he could take it up with me instead of spreading poison around town. Eliza's stomach knotted. Caleb, I know I shouldn't have said it, but I'm tired of people like him acting like education is some kind of threat. It is a threat to men like him. Good. She wanted to argue, to tell him he needed to be more careful, but she couldn't, because he was right. The confrontation with Coleman had consequences. A week later, 3 families pulled their children out of school. They didn't give reasons, but Eliza knew why. Coleman had gotten to them, convinced them that what she and Caleb were doing was dangerous. We'll be fine, Caleb said, seeing her face. We've lost 6 students. We still have 17, and more families are asking about enrollment for next term. What if Coleman convinces them too? Then we'll deal with it. But we're not changing what we're doing just because some people are scared. He was right, but it didn't make it easier. The winter was harder than the previous year, but in different ways. The work was exhausting, teaching all day, keeping the schoolhouse warm, preparing lessons at night. Money was tighter than ever. Eliza's coat was wearing through at the elbows, and Caleb's boots had holes in them that he kept patching with scraps of leather. But there were good moments, too. One afternoon, a girl named Lucy read an entire book out loud without a single mistake. She was 8 years old and had started the year barely knowing the alphabet. When she finished, she looked up at Eliza with tears in her eyes. I did it. You did. I can read. You can. Lucy threw her arms around Eliza and held on tight. Thank you, Mrs. Stroud. Eliza hugged her back, her own throat tight. You did this yourself, Lucy. I just showed you how. Zolci dispoisaskan. Moments like that made everything worth it. Christmas came again, and this time it felt different. The families whose children attended the school organized a small celebration at the schoolhouse. Everyone brought what they could: food, small gifts, firewood. The children sang songs they'd learned, and Pop read a story he'd written himself about a dog who saved a farm from wolves. That was good, Caleb told him afterward. Tom's face went red. You think so? I know so. You're a good writer, Tom. Maybe I could write more, like stories for other people to read. Maybe you could. Watching them, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not in herself, but in what they'd all built together. That night, walking back to the bunkhouse under a sky full of stars, Caleb took her hand. You know what I realized today? What? I'm happy. She stopped walking. You are? Yeah. I never thought I'd be able to say that, but I am. He looked at her. Are you? She thought about it. About the leaky bunkhouse and the worn-out clothes and the constant struggle to make ends meet. About the long days and the hard work and the people who still looked at them like they were outsiders. But she also thought about the schoolhouse full of children who could read now. About Caleb, who'd gone from barely literate to teaching others. About the community they were building, one lesson at a time. Yes, she said. I'm happy. He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the frozen road, and for a moment everything else fell away. But happiness didn't mean easy. In February, Eliza realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks but hadn't said anything, hadn't wanted to believe it until she was sure. But there was no denying it anymore. She was tired all the time, nauseous in the mornings, and her clothes were starting to feel tight. She told Caleb on a Sunday afternoon when they were alone in the bunkhouse. I'm going to have a baby. He stared at her. You're sure? I'm sure. He sat down heavily on the bed, his face unreadable. When? Late summer, I think. August, maybe September. He didn't say anything. Caleb, are you all right? I don't know. He looked up at her. I don't know how to be a father. I don't know how to be a mother. That's different. Why? Because... He stopped, rubbed his face. Because I don't want to mess this up. She sat down beside him. We'll figure it out. Same way we figured out everything else. You keep saying that. Because it's true. He took her hand, his grip tight. I'm scared. Me too. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands in the cold room, trying to wrap their heads around the fact that in a few months, they'd be responsible for another human being. We need more money, Caleb said finally. I know. And a better place to live. This bunkhouse isn't fit for a baby. I know. I'll talk to Hank, see if there's more work I can take on. Eliza nodded, but her stomach was churning. The baby changed everything. They couldn't just scrape by anymore, not with a child on the way. Hank listened to Caleb's request and nodded thoughtfully. I've been meaning to talk to you anyway, he said. You've been doing good work here, and what you and your wife are doing with that school, that's something special. People are noticing. Thank you. So here's what I'm thinking. There's a piece of land about a mile from here, 20 acres. It's not much, but it's good grazing land, and there's a creek that runs through it year-round. Hank leaned back in his chair. I'm willing to sell it to you, for a fair price, payable over time. Caleb's heart started pounding. How much? $200. You can pay it off over 5 years, and I'll help you build a house on it if you're willing to do most of the labor yourself. It was more money than Caleb had ever had in his life, but it was also a chance at something real, something permanent. I'll need to talk to Eliza. Of course, let me know. When Caleb told Eliza, she cried. We can't afford that, she said. We'll make it work. How? I'll take on more work. You can keep teaching, at least until the baby comes. We'll save every penny we can. And if we can't make the payments, then we'll lose the land. But we have to try, Eliza. We can't raise a child in this bunkhouse. She wiped her eyes. You're right. So we're doing this? We're doing this. They shook on it with Hank the next day. The land was rough, covered in sagebrush and rocks, with no shelter except a few scraggly trees near the creek. But it was theirs. Or it would be, once they paid it off. Building the house was brutal work. Caleb worked on it every spare moment he had, cutting logs and hauling stones and digging the foundation. Some of the other ranch hands helped when they could, and a few of the fathers whose children attended the school showed up on weekends with tools and materials. Eliza helped where she could, even as her belly grew and moving became harder. She couldn't lift heavy things anymore, but she could mix mortar and hold boards steady and keep everyone fed. "You should be resting," Martha told her. "I'll rest when the house is done." That's not how it works. It's how it has to work. By June, they had 4 walls and a roof. It wasn't finished, the floors were still dirt, and they didn't have a door yet, but it was shelter. They moved in 2 weeks later, sleeping on blankets spread across the ground, cooking over a fire pit outside. It was rough. It was uncomfortable. But it was theirs. Eliza kept teaching through July, even as the baby grew bigger and the summer heat became oppressive. The children noticed, of course, asked her when the baby was coming, if it would be a boy or a girl, what she was going to name it. "I don't know yet," she told them. "Can we help name it?" Lucy asked. "Maybe." Tom raised his hand. "Will the baby learn to read?" "Of course. Even if it's really little? Especially if it's really little." The children seemed satisfied with that. In early August, Eliza taught her last class before the baby came. She was so big now that standing for more than a few minutes left her breathless and her back ached constantly. But she made it through the day reading one final story to the children before sending them home. Caleb walked her back to their house, his arm around her waist. "You did good," he said. "I'm exhausted." "I know, but you did good." That night, lying on the makeshift bed Caleb had built, Eliza stared up at the rough ceiling and thought about everything that had happened since they'd left Colorado. The long journey west, the struggles to survive, the school they'd built, the house they were still finishing, and now a baby on the way. "Are we ready for this?" she asked. Caleb was lying beside her, his hand resting on her belly. "No, that's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be." He smiled in the darkness. "But we'll figure it out. You always say that." Because it's always true. 3 weeks later, on a hot August night, Eliza went into labor. It was long and brutal and terrifying. Martha was there, coaching her through it, and Caleb held her hand the entire time, looking more scared than Eliza had ever seen him. But when it was over, when she heard that first cry, everything else fell away. Martha placed the baby in her arms, a girl, small and red-faced and perfect. "She's beautiful," Martha said. Eliza couldn't speak. She just stared at the tiny person in her arms, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. Caleb leaned over, his face wet with tears. "We did it. We did. What should we name her?" Eliza looked down at their daughter, this small life they'd created, and thought about everything it had taken to get here. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Hope didn't sleep. At least that's what it felt like to Eliza during those first few weeks. The baby would wake every 2 hours screaming, and Eliza would stumble out of bed in the darkness, exhausted beyond anything she'd ever known. Caleb tried to help, but there was only so much he could do. He'd hold Hope while Eliza rested, walking circles around their unfinished house, murmuring to the baby in his rough voice until she quieted. "I don't know how people do this," Eliza said one morning, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. "They just do. Same as us." "I feel like I'm dying." "You're not dying, you're just tired. That's what dying feels like." He smiled, but his own eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. He was still working on the ranch during the day, coming home to help finish the house at night. They'd managed to install a real door and build a proper bed frame, but the floors were still dirt and the walls needed chinking before winter came. Money was tighter than ever. The school had shut down while Eliza recovered, which meant they'd lost the small income she'd been bringing in from teaching. They were living on Caleb's wages alone, and it wasn't enough. "We need to make a payment to Hank next month," Caleb said one night, doing calculations on a scrap of paper. $40. "Do we have it?" "We have 32. Eliza's stomach knotted. What do we do? I'll pick up extra work. Maybe some of the other ranchers need help. You're already working every daylight hour. Then I'll work at night, too. Caleb, what else are we going to do, Eliza? We made a commitment. We have to keep it. She knew he was right, but it didn't make it easier. He found work with a rancher named Patterson, helping repair fences on weekends. It paid $3 a day, which wasn't much, but it was enough to make up the difference. Eliza hated watching him leave before dawn and not come back until after dark. His hands raw and bleeding, his body so tired he could barely eat before collapsing into bed. But they made the payment. When Hope was 6 weeks old, Eliza started teaching again. She couldn't leave the baby alone, so she brought Hope to the schoolhouse in a basket and set her near the fireplace where she could keep an eye on her. The children were fascinated by the baby, crowding around to peek at her during breaks. Can I hold her? Lucy asked. Maybe when she's a little older. When will that be? Soon. Teaching with a baby was chaos. Hope would cry in the middle of lessons, and Eliza would have to stop to feed her or change her or just hold her until she settled. The older students were patient, but the younger ones got restless. More than once, Eliza had to cut class short because Hope wouldn't stop screaming. Maybe you should wait a few more weeks, Martha suggested. We need the money. I know, but we need the money, Eliza repeated, her voice harder than she'd intended. Martha didn't push, but it was taking a toll. Eliza was exhausted all the time, struggling to keep up with the demands of teaching and caring for Hope and helping Caleb with the house. She snapped at the children more than she meant to, lost her patience over small things, cried in the evenings when Hope finally slept, and she had a moment to herself. I don't know if I can do this, she told Caleb one night. You're doing it already. Barely. Barely is enough. She wanted to believe him, but she was so tired. Things got worse before they got better. In October, Hope got sick. It started as a small cough, nothing concerning, but within 2 days she was burning with fever, her tiny body shaking with each breath. Eliza held her through the night, terrified, while Caleb rode to fetch the nearest doctor, a man named Green who lived 15 miles away. Green arrived at dawn, examined Hope, and said it was likely pneumonia. Will she be all right? Eliza asked, her voice breaking. I don't know. Baby's this young. It's hard to say. You need to keep her warm, keep fluids in her, and pray. Eliza didn't pray. She just held Hope and refused to let go. For 3 days, the baby's fever raged. Eliza didn't sleep, didn't eat, just sat by the fire with Hope in her arms, willing her to keep breathing. Caleb stayed close, doing what he could, but there was nothing to do but wait. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Hope opened her eyes, looked up at Eliza, and made a small sound that might have been a coo. Eliza burst into tears, holding her daughter close, whispering thank you to no one in particular. She's going to be all right, Caleb said, his own voice thick. I thought we were going to lose her. I know, but we didn't. Eliza looked down at Hope, so small and fragile, and felt something shift inside her. This child was hers to protect, and she would do whatever it took to keep her safe. But the scare had cost them. Dr. Green's fee was $10, money they didn't have. They'd had to borrow it from Hank, adding to their already mounting debt. We're drowning, Eliza said. We're not drowning. We're treading water. That's not much better. It's better than sinking. She wanted to argue, but she was too tired. Winter came hard and fast that year. The house still wasn't finished. They'd managed to install a floor and chink most of the walls, but the windows were just shutters and the roof leaked in 2 places. They hung blankets to divide the single room into sections, but it didn't do much to keep out the cold. Eliza kept teaching through November, but when December hit and the temperature dropped below freezing, she had to shut the school down. It was too cold for the children to walk the distances they traveled, and the schoolhouse couldn't be heated well enough to be safe. That meant no income again. Caleb took on every job he could find, chopping wood for other ranchers, hauling supplies, helping butcher cattle. He was gone more than he was home, and when he was home he was too exhausted to do more than eat and sleep. Eliza felt like she was going crazy, stuck in the house with just Hope for company. The baby was better now, growing and healthy, but she still demanded constant attention. And Eliza was so isolated, no adult conversation, no one to talk to except a baby who couldn't talk back. She started walking to Martha's house once a week, Hope bundled against her chest just to have someone to talk to. "You look terrible, Martha said the first time she showed up. "Thank you." "I'm serious, Eliza. You need to rest." "I can't rest. There's too much to do." "Then let someone help you." "There's no one to help." Martha frowned. "What about the women from the school? Some of them would be happy to watch Hope for a few hours so you could sleep." Eliza hadn't thought of that. She'd been so focused on doing everything herself that it hadn't occurred to her to ask for help. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden. You're part of this community, and communities help each other." So Eliza asked, and to her surprise, people said yes. Susan offered to watch Hope 2 afternoons a week. Another woman named Helen took her on Thursdays. It wasn't much, but it gave Eliza time to breathe, to sleep, to remember what it felt like to be a person instead of just a mother. It helped. Not completely, but enough. By the time spring arrived, they'd survived another winter, barely. They were behind on their payments to Hank, 2 months overdue now, and Caleb's wages had been cut because the ranch wasn't doing well. They were eating less, wearing clothes that were more patches than fabric, burning every scrap of wood they could find to stay warm. But they were still here, still together, still fighting. "I want to reopen the school," Eliza said one evening in March. Caleb looked up from the harness he was mending. "You sure? We need the money, and those kids need to keep learning. What about Hope?" "I'll bring her with me, same as before." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue. "All right." The school reopened in April. To Eliza's surprise, even more families wanted their children to attend than before. Word had spread about what she and Caleb were doing, and people were traveling from farther away to enroll their kids. "We need more space," Caleb said, looking at the crowded schoolhouse. "We don't have money for more space." "What if we built another room onto the cabin?" "With what materials?" He thought about it. "I'll talk to some people, see what we can scrounge." It took 3 months, but they did it. With donated lumber and labor from parents whose children attended the school, they built an addition onto the schoolhouse, a second room that doubled the space. It wasn't fancy, but it worked, and it meant Eliza could hire help. Tom, who was 14 now and one of her best students, offered to teach the younger children in the mornings while Eliza worked with the older ones. She couldn't pay him much, just $1 a week, but he didn't seem to care. "I want to be a teacher," he said. "Like you and Mr. Stroud." "You'll be a good one." "You think so?" "I know so." Having Tom's help changed everything. Eliza could focus on the students who needed more attention, and the younger children got instruction tailored to their level. The school was running better than it ever had, but success brought new challenges. As the school grew, so did the opposition. Coleman was still spreading his poison, and he'd found allies, other ranchers and farmers who saw education as a threat to their control. They started a campaign to shut the school down, arguing that it was taking children away from necessary work and filling their heads with dangerous ideas. "They're going to the territorial council," Martha told Eliza, "asking them to pass a law requiring parental approval for any child under 12 to attend school. But that's ridiculous. Most of the parents want their children in school. Not all of them. And Coleman's making it sound like you're forcing kids to attend against their parents' wishes. That's not true. Doesn't matter if it's true. Matters if people believe it." Eliza felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. After everything they'd built, after all the work they'd done, it could all be taken away by a few men who were scared of change. "What do we do?" she asked Caleb that night. "We fight back." "How?" "We talk to the parents, we make sure they understand what's at stake, and we make sure their voices are heard at the council meeting." So they organized. Eliza and Caleb went door to door talking to every family whose children attended the school. They explained what Coleman was trying to do and why it mattered that parents showed up to speak against it. "Will it work?" Eliza asked. "I don't know, but we have to try." The council meeting was held on a Tuesday in June. Eliza and Caleb arrived early, Hope strapped to Eliza's back in a sling. The meeting room was packed, Coleman and his allies on one side, the school's supporters on the other. Coleman spoke first, his voice booming through the room. "What we're seeing here is an erosion of traditional values. Children being taken from their families, from their work, from their responsibilities, and taught to question everything they've been raised to believe. This school is creating a generation of young people who think they're too good for honest labor, who think they're entitled to something better than what their parents had. He went on for 10 minutes, painting Eliza and Caleb as troublemakers who were destroying the fabric of the community. When he finished, the council chairman asked if anyone wanted to speak in defense of the school. Eliza stood up, her heart pounding. "My name is Eliza Stroud. My husband and I run the school you're talking about, and I want to tell you what we actually do there." She talked about the children who'd learned to read and write, who could now do arithmetic and understand basic geography. She talked about Tom, who'd gone from struggling with the alphabet to teaching other children. She talked about Lucy, who could now read entire books on her own. She talked about James, who discovered he had a gift for mathematics and was now helping his father run the family business more efficiently. "These children aren't being taught to abandon their families or their responsibilities," Eliza said. "They're being taught to think, to question, to make their own decisions. And yes, that scares some people, because when people can think for themselves, they're harder to control." She looked directly at Coleman. "You're not trying to protect these children. You're trying to protect your own power, and you're using fear to do it." The room erupted. Coleman was on his feet shouting. His supporters were yelling, but the school's parents were yelling too, louder and angrier. The chairman banged his gavel, calling for order. One by one, parents stood up to speak. Tom's father talked about how his son could now read contracts and keep books, making the family farm more profitable. Sarah's mother talked about how her daughter, who'd been shy and withdrawn, had found confidence through reading. Garrett talked about how his youngest son, who everyone had written off as slow, was now one of the best students in the school. By the time everyone had spoken, it was clear which way the room was leaning. The council voted. The motion to require parental approval for school attendance was defeated, 4 votes to 2. Eliza felt like she could breathe again. Caleb put his arm around her as they left the meeting room. "You did good." "We did good." "No, that was you. You stood up there and told them the truth. That took guts." She leaned into him, exhausted but relieved. "I was terrified." Didn't show. That summer was better than the previous ones. The school was thriving, with nearly 30 students now. Eliza had hired 2 more teachers, young women from neighboring ranches who'd attended the school themselves and wanted to give back. The schoolhouse had become a community hub, hosting meetings and gatherings and even Sunday dinners. And the payments to Hank were finally caught up. "We did it," Caleb said, looking at the receipt Hank had given them. "We're not done yet. We still owe him $120. But we're current. That's something." It was something. It was a lot, actually. Hope was walking now, toddling around the house and getting into everything. She was curious and fearless, constantly exploring, constantly asking questions in her limited vocabulary. Eliza watched her daughter and marveled at how different her life would be from Eliza's own childhood. Hope would grow up knowing she could read, knowing she could learn, knowing she had choices. That fall, something unexpected happened. A man showed up at the schoolhouse one afternoon, well-dressed, with a leather satchel and an air of authority. He introduced himself as Mr. Wesley, a representative from the Territorial Education Board. "I've heard about what you're doing here," he said, "and I wanted to see it for myself." Eliza's stomach tightened. "Is there a problem?" "Quite the opposite. I'm here to help." He spent the day observing classes, talking to the children, reviewing the curriculum Eliza had developed. At the end of the day, he sat down with Eliza and Caleb. "What you've built here is remarkable," he said. "You're teaching children who would otherwise have no access to education, and you're doing it with minimal resources and no formal training." "Thank you," Eliza said cautiously. "The territorial government is starting a program to support community schools like yours. We can provide funding for materials, teacher salaries, and building improvements. Not a lot, but enough to make a difference." Eliza stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Because education is the foundation of a functioning society, and schools like yours are proof that it works." He pulled papers from his satchel. "If you're interested, I can help you apply for funding." They applied, and 2 months later they received a grant, $50 a year to support the school. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to buy proper textbooks, to pay Tom and the other teachers a fair wage, to repair the roof and install real windows in the schoolhouse. "Things are getting better," Caleb said one night. Eliza looked around their house, still small, still rough, but finished now. They had a real floor, real windows, a door that closed properly. They had food on the table and clothes that weren't falling apart. They had a daughter who was healthy and happy. They had a school that was making a real difference. "Yeah," she said, "they are." But she'd learned by now that better didn't mean easy. The winter of 1887 was one of the worst on record. Snow piled higher than Eliza had ever seen, and the temperature stayed below zero for weeks. Livestock froze in the fields. Supplies ran low. Families who lived far from town were completely cut off. The school shut down in January because it was too dangerous for children to travel. Eliza spent the winter months caring for Hope, now 2.5, and reading every book she could get her hands on. Caleb worked when the weather allowed, but there were long stretches when he was stuck inside with them, pacing like a caged animal. "I hate this," he said one afternoon. "Hate what?" "Being trapped, feeling useless." "You're not useless. I'm not doing anything. You're keeping us alive. That's not nothing." He didn't look convinced, but he found ways to be useful. He started working on improvements to the house, building shelves and a proper table and a cradle for Hope, even though she was getting too big for it. He read to Hope every night, his voice slow and careful, as he worked through children's stories Eliza had borrowed from the Territorial Library. Watching him with their daughter, Eliza felt a surge of emotion she couldn't quite name. This man, who'd shown up on her doorstep half dead and unable to read, was now reading bedtime stories to their child. He'd come so far, and she'd come far with him. Spring arrived late that year, but when it finally came, it came with a fury. The snow melted too fast, flooding the creek and turning the roads into rivers of mud. The schoolhouse flooded, ruining half their books and supplies. "We'll rebuild," Caleb said, surveying the damage. "With what money?" "We'll figure it out." They did. Parents donated materials, neighbors helped with repairs, and within 2 weeks the schoolhouse was operational again. But the flood had taken a toll, and Eliza was exhausted. "You need to slow down," Martha told her. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because if I stop, everything falls apart." "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Martha studied her. "You know what your problem is? You think you have to carry everything yourself, but you don't. You've built something bigger than just you and Caleb. This community will support the school whether you're running yourself ragged or not." Eliza wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Because Martha was right, she started delegating more. She let Tom and the other teachers take on more responsibility. She asked parents to help with maintenance and fundraising. She stopped trying to control every detail and trusted that the community would step up. And they did. By the summer of 1888, the school had expanded again. They'd built a third room and enrolled 45 students. 3 more teachers had joined the staff, and the territorial government had increased their grant to $75 a year. "We did it," Eliza said, looking at the bustling schoolhouse. Caleb smiled. "You sound surprised." "I am surprised. I never thought—" She stopped, shook her head. "I never thought this was possible." "Why not?" "Because I spent so many years being invisible, being told I wasn't enough. And now look at this. Look at what we built." "You built it. I just helped." "No, we built it together." Hope was 3 now, talking in full sentences and following Eliza everywhere. She loved the school, loved being around the other children, loved learning letters and numbers, even though she was still too young to be a formal student. "Mama, can I go to school?" she asked one afternoon. "You're a little young for that." "But I want to learn." Eliza smiled. "You're already learning, every day." "But I want to learn more." Looking at her daughter's eager face, Eliza felt a wave of gratitude. Hope would never know what it was like to be told she couldn't learn, couldn't think, couldn't be more than what others expected. She would grow up in a world where education was a right, not a privilege. That fall, Caleb made the final payment to Hank. They'd done it. The land was theirs. Hank shook Caleb's hand, his face proud. "You're a good man, Stroud. Your wife, too. What you've built here, It's something special. Thank you for giving us the chance. You earned it. That night, Eliza and Caleb sat outside their house, watching the sun set over the land they now owned. Hope was asleep inside, and for the first time in years, Eliza felt like she could relax. You ever think about where we started? Caleb asked. All the time. You regret any of it? She thought about the cold nights, the hunger, the fear, the endless struggle. No, not for a second. Me neither. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands in the fading light. What do you think happens next? Eliza asked. I don't know, but I'm looking forward to finding out. The years that followed weren't without challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, conflicts with neighbors, moments when money was so tight they didn't know how they'd make it through. But they kept going, kept building, kept pushing forward. The school continued to grow. By 1892, they had 60 students and 5 teachers. They'd expanded the building twice more and started offering classes for adults who wanted to learn to read. Caleb taught most of those classes himself, and Eliza would sometimes watch him work with students who reminded her of how he'd been when they first met, ashamed of not knowing, afraid to try, convinced they were too old or too stupid to learn. You're never too old, Caleb would tell them, and you're not stupid. You just need someone to show you how. He'd become a respected member of the community, sought out for advice and leadership. The man who'd arrived half dead and illiterate was now someone people looked up to. Eliza had changed too. She was no longer the quiet, invisible woman who'd spent her life doing what was expected. She spoke her mind, stood her ground, made decisions without apology. She'd found her voice, and she wasn't going to lose it. Hope was 8 now, bright and curious and full of questions. She was one of the best students in the school, devouring books faster than Eliza could supply them. She wanted to be a teacher when she grew up, just like her parents. You can be anything you want, Eliza told her. I want to be like you. You can be better than me, but you're the best. Eliza hugged her daughter, her throat tight. You're going to do amazing things, Hope. I know it. One evening in the spring of 1895, Eliza stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse, watching the children file out after class. They were laughing, talking, carrying books and slates, their faces bright with the kind of confidence that came from knowing they mattered. Tom was there too, now 21 and one of the school's lead teachers. He'd written a series of primers specifically designed for children in rural areas, and they were being used in schools across the territory. You did good today, Eliza told him. Thanks, Mrs. Stroud. You don't have to call me that anymore. You're not my student. You'll always be Mrs. Stroud to me. She smiled. Fair enough. As the last child left, Caleb appeared, Hope on his shoulders. She was giggling, her hands tangled in his hair. Ready to go home? He asked. Almost. Eliza turned back to look at the schoolhouse one more time. It was just a building, rough wood and stone, nothing fancy, but it represented something bigger than itself. It represented possibility, choice, the idea that people could be more than what they were born into. You all right? Caleb asked. Yeah, I'm just thinking. About what? About how far we've come, about what we've built. He shifted Hope on his shoulders and took Eliza's hand. We built something good. We did. They walked home together as the sun set, their shadows long on the dirt road. Behind them, the schoolhouse stood quiet in the fading light, waiting for tomorrow's lessons. Years later, when Hope was grown and teaching in a school of her own, she would ask her mother about those early days, about what it was like to start from nothing, to fight for something people said was impossible. Were you ever afraid you'd fail? Hope asked. Eliza thought about it. Every day. Then why did you keep going? Because the alternative was worse. Failing meant giving up, and giving up meant accepting that things would never change, that people like me and your father would always be told we weren't enough. I couldn't accept that, so I kept going, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Hope nodded, understanding in a way only someone who'd grown up watching her parents build something from nothing could understand. Do you think it was worth it? She asked. Eliza looked at her daughter, confident, educated, capable of anything she set her mind to, and smiled. every single second. The school Eliza and Caleb built continued long after they were gone. It became a model for other community schools across the territory and eventually the state. Generations of children passed through its doors, learning to read and write, learning to think for themselves, learning that they were worth something. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Eliza had learned the night she opened her door to a dying stranger. People aren't defined by where they start. They're defined by what they choose to do with the chances they're given. Eliza and Caleb had been given a chance, by each other, by the community that eventually embraced them, by their own refusal to accept the limitations others placed on them. And they'd taken that chance and built something that mattered. Not because they were perfect. They weren't. They made mistakes, lost their tempers, struggled with doubt and fear and exhaustion. But they kept showing up, kept trying, kept believing that they could be more than what the world told them they were. And in the end, that was enough. On a warm afternoon in 1910, Eliza sat on the porch of the house she and Caleb had built with their own hands. She was older now, her hair gray, her hands marked by years of work, but her mind was sharp and her heart was full. Caleb sat beside her, reading a book, something he did every day now, sometimes for hours. He read history and philosophy and novels, making up for all the years he'd lost. Hope's children, their grandchildren, were playing in the yard, their laughter filling the air. The school was visible from where they sat, bigger now, with multiple buildings and a staff of 12 teachers. "You think we did all right?" Caleb asked, not looking up from his book. "I think we did better than all right." "Yeah?" "Yeah." He closed the book and looked at her. "No regrets?" She thought about the question, about everything they'd sacrificed and struggled through and overcome. "None," she said. "Not a single one." He took her hand, and they sat together in the afternoon sun, two people who'd started with nothing and built a life worth living. Not because it was easy, not because they were special, but because they'd refused to stay small. And in that refusal, they'd found something most people spend their whole lives searching for, a sense of purpose, a community that valued them, and the knowledge that their lives had made a difference. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. In the distance, the school bell rang, signaling the end of another day. Children streamed out, carrying books and dreams, heading home to families who now understood the value of education. Eliza watched them go and felt a deep satisfaction. This was her legacy. Not just the school, but the idea behind it, that everyone deserves a chance to learn, to grow, to become more than what others expect. "We did good," she said quietly. Caleb squeezed her hand. "We did." And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eliza Stroud, once invisible, once dismissed, once told she wasn't enough, closed her eyes and smiled. Because she knew the truth now. She'd always been enough. She'd just needed the courage to prove it. And in proving it, she'd helped others find their own courage, their own worth, their own voice. That was the real lesson. Not that life would be easy if you worked hard enough. Not that everything would work out if you just believed. But that you had the power to choose who you became, regardless of where you started. Eliza and Caleb had chosen to become more than the world expected. And in doing so, they'd changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone they touched. That was worth everything.